Welcome to the Future of Payroll and Workforce Management Insights by HR.com, your go-to resource for insights into payroll and workforce management. From navigating compliance and technology trends to exploring the latest in global payroll solutions, we're here to keep you ahead of the curve. Join us as we dive into the forces reshaping payroll and share practical strategies to optimize your workforce management. Let's get started. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Future of Payroll and Workforce Management, a podcast here at HR.com, where I am your host, Brent Skinner, and I do many things at HR.com. So many things that sometimes I forget everything I do, but enough about me. Today is about my guest, Carney Kim, who is payroll manager at Alexander and Baldwin, correct?
That's right.
Absolutely, and you're hailing from Hawaii today.
That is also true.
And every day, actually, you're based on Hawaii. Thanks so much for joining us for the podcast today. We have a really interesting topic today around payroll, who should own it, how to manage the transformation around that, and some of the technology you're using for it. But as I like to ask all my guests before we kind of dive into any topic is, what got you into payroll? How did you get into payroll? Because that's always an interesting story. And also, what gets you going and motivated every day when it comes to payroll in the world of work, Carney?
So I kind of got into payroll, kind of the same story that we hear from a lot of payroll folks, right? Just kind of fell into it. So I actually got referred to my first payroll job from a friend of mine who had been working there for a few months. And um, my response to him when he told me to apply for the job was, how much are they paying? I don't care what I'm doing. How much are they paying? I showed up for the interview and, it went great. And when they made me an offer, all I saw was that dollar sign, right? And it was paying 25 cents more per hour at the time than what I was making at my previous job. And I was like, sign me up. I'm in.
That's good.
So that was kind of my foot in the door into the world of payroll and HR. And I kind of fell in love with it, as we all do. And I think it was about 5 years in when I thought, man, I've kind of gone as far as I could go at this point. I don't see much of a future in payroll for myself anyway.
Mm.
So I took a step away from payroll for a little bit. I was doing some business analytics. That lasted about maybe 8 months or so, and then I got sucked right back into payroll because the company that I was doing the analytics for, their payroll manager left kind of abruptly, and they just needed someone, and I was there. I had the experience, so I was like, you know what? Why not? Gonna be a raise for me? Sure, I'll take it. And that's when I really developed an even stronger affinity for payroll. And I think at that point I was doing less of the work myself, and it was more um, leadership and management and coaching folks and training.
Mhm.
And that kind of leads me into my answer to the second part of your question is what gets me out of bed in the morning is really that transfer of knowledge and seeing the development in my staff and them learning these payroll concepts and finally being able to connect the dots to what it is that they're actually doing.
Mm. Spoken like a true leader. That's phenomenal. That's great. Yeah. And it's funny how you say that, that falling into payroll, it really is the story for the vast majority of people. They just kind of fell into it, and the people who stay, they really like it or they're really good at it, usually both. And a few leaders emerge. And that's always great for the profession. And we've actually covered the topic several times on the podcast around, how to kind of form some more structure around payroll so that it becomes an actual career path that maybe people think about. beforehand, premeditated as opposed to after the fact. And there's some succession planning and that sort of stuff that is bedeviling the payroll profession at the moment. It's all interesting stuff, and maybe we could have you back sometime to talk about that stuff, Carney. But in the meantime, we have a super duper interesting topic, and it is we've touched on this a few times in the podcast here. And when you and I spoke the other day in the green room, we have a green room here at the podcast. We're not a late night talk show, but we do have a green room. Uh, and we were talking about this question that it's come up previously in my conversations with others, and that is who should own payroll? And it typically comes down to HR or finance. And sometimes it belongs to finance, sometimes it belongs to HR. I imagine that kind of just sort of happens too at a lot of places. There's not much, sort of intentionality behind that. But you have some thoughts around why HR should own payroll, and would you please share that with our audience because those ideas because it was really interesting.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think, and I know that you've had a couple of guests talk about this, is now we have talk about a chief payroll officer, right?
Mm,
That payroll should be its own vertical. And I'm all for it. I'd love to see that. I'd love to myself be part of that C-suite, right?
mm,
But in all honesty, most companies aren't quite there yet.
mm,
It's going to be a while, I think, before we see that, as part of the mainstream. So in the meantime, I think, need to look at like what is the function of payroll, right? And if you're looking at strictly from a business and finance point of view, we're just paying bills, and our vendors happen to be our employees, and we're
mm,
just paying them for the work that they're doing. The way I look at it is we're taking care of our employees, right? And um, you know, the paycheck to the employee, that's like the most important thing. Right? And it goes back to how I got into payroll. Like I never would have got into payroll if I wasn't getting that extra 25 cents per hour, right? And there's not a lot of people that I know that would take a job if they weren't going to get paid for. When you look at it that way, payroll really is a function to take care of your employees, and that's why I think ultimately payroll should reside in HR.
mm. Yeah, yeah. It this has come up also. Payroll really is ground zero for the employee experience, in my opinion. It's
I
it's
agree.
and it also it's one of those things. I always liken it to the power company. You wake up in the morning, you turn the light on in the kitchen, and um, turn on your coffee maker, and you don't call up the power company say, "Hey, thank you for sending me electricity this morning without any hiccups and the right way, just enough that I needed, right?" Correctly. The same thing kind of goes with payroll. When it goes right, nobody's really calling up payroll and saying, "Hey, thank you for getting my check to me in time," and all this. But when it goes wrong, just like with the power company, that all hell breaks loose, and it's similar with payroll. It can be a very, very it could be an existential crisis for the organization in terms of the employer culture. And I know that's kind of a sidebar to what we're talking about today, but but I just wanted to mention that because I think it really does put a fine point on what you said about, HR being about taking care of the employees and that employee experience, and payroll being so, central to that. Um, Now we were talking, and when you joined Alexander and Baldwin, um, then had kind of an interesting case in point here, or for instance, where payroll belonged to finance when you joined Alexander and Baldwin, and you went about sort of changing that. How what was that like?
That was one of the questions I had asked, coming into this position. And before I became an official employee, I was here as a temp employee to kind of fill in for someone who was out on leave. And one of the questions I had asked the hiring manager was, why did you choose to have payroll sit under finance? And I don't think I ever got a clear answer. But they did mention that they had wanted to move actually, and they had plans to move payroll into HR because they did think that it made more sense for payroll to sit in HR. They just haven't been able to do it. So when I came on board, that was one of the first projects I worked on was getting payroll more integrated with HR. And I was fortunate enough. The way that our departments are situated in our office, the payroll office actually sits in the HR department. So they were physically already sitting there. It's just the line of reporting went up to finance instead of the HR director. In terms of logistics, in that sense, that was kind of easy. But everything else, this company is so great in the way that, departments kind of communicate with each other. So it really wasn't that hard of a lift. It kind of just happened.
Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. I think you made me think of something. I think a lot of people may go into this thinking, "Oh gosh, this is going to be a big turf battle and all this sort of stuff," and it might be, but depends on the organization. Sometimes it's a real easy switch. And it sounds to me like there wasn't much. It just kind of almost a roll of the dice, in terms of that it just fell under finance. It just was sort of an oh by the way decision, however long ago. And there were no real feelings attached to that. Um, and proximity obviously breeds collaboration. With the payroll department being the payroll people being situated where the HR people in the organization, like physically in their office space, that that helps too. Um, what was it like actually doing the transition, like the actual moving of payroll to come under the aegis of HR? Like what
Yeah,
like
I think one of the challenges that they had previously in not being able to make the move was not having someone that could actually lead the department, I think.
okay.
And I think the finance person that payroll was originally reporting to, she was just a stronger leader. But I think that brings me back to kind of why I think some organizations choose to have payroll sit with finance versus sitting under HR. And one of the things that the person who interviewed me, she had mentioned to me during my interview was that this company kind of operates in some ways like a startup, and she kept making this comment that the company is basically a 150-year-old startup, and it's very agile company, and they're willing to do things outside of what is traditional. And the leadership was very supportive of trying things out and testing things out, and um, that I think operating in that mindset, I think is one of the things that helped us make that shift because I think traditionally, and even in much smaller companies, you may not have the resources to have a proper HR department, right? Um, in a larger organization, you have an HR department that takes care of, culture and training and development and all that kind of stuff. In a smaller organization, you don't always have that luxury, right? And so payroll then becomes just a necessity. We just have to pay these people. Who cares about culture? Who cares about, all this other stuff? We have the resources to pay people, and that's all we're going to do. But when you start getting these, and I hate to speak negatively about, the companies that have payroll departments roll up into finance because obviously there's a ton of companies that do, and they're very successful. But I think a lot of these smaller companies, they don't have the resources to focus on people, and their payroll departments sit with finances out of necessity. But when you start really thinking about employee experience and how to move your company forward, um, that all starts from the inside, I think. And where better to start than, HR?
You make me think of all sorts of things. So first of all, that's a new twist on late stage startup. I have to say. um, um, and you know what? It's true. At 99.999% of the time with a new company, payroll is that's just another, accounts payable thing. It's just another outgoing expense. And so its natural resting place is with finance in the beginning, right? Because it has to do with money going out. Um,
Right.
and so there comes a point when I'm kind of hearing you say is that, well, we hear about payroll maturity models, and we hear about HCM maturity models. And at some point in an organization's life cycle, its evolution, it reaches a stage, a level of maturity where it makes sense, more sense maybe, to bring payroll under the auspices of HR, to make it part of that, to kind of it's kind of graduated from being a straightforward, just black and white kind of, this is what we pay out every day, that so every 2 weeks or whatever it is, to, we got to give this a little bit more thought, and sort of integrate it with our people strategy, if you will. So that's really interesting to me. And I'm glad you kind of brought up those questions. And there are some sound rationales for, and we won't get into them right now, but plenty of them for finance to own payroll at certain organizations or whatever, maybe for agility, maybe, you know, it depends. Um, how did technology factor into this? I know that you use Dayforce. I know that. Was that the case when you joined Alexander and Baldwin?
Yes. So the organization was already using Dayforce, and I think the beauty of Dayforce is everything is kind of integrated. And so that was another reason to me. It just made sense for payroll to sit with HR, because all of the other data that payroll needs that typically comes from HR, it was already in the system, right?
Mm.
So we've got um, the time clocks that are kind of built in to the Dayforce environment. So when we're running payroll, the information just flows. It's not, we're not getting the export out of one place and importing it back in and doing all this stuff. It's all just there. And interestingly enough, the only part of it that needed to be exported to be plugged into a different system was the general ledger information. So all the finance stuff, that's the stuff that needed to be exported. That's running on a different platform.
That's interesting. So it's almost a gravity thing, right? Dayforce is just had
Yeah.
more gravitational pull, and and you know what? That's interesting. And I'm glad you brought it up because we talked about it in the green room, is that there's a lot of other stuff that falls under the responsibilities of HR, that are natural sort of upstream things to payroll, like scheduling, like time and attendance, and a few other benefits even. Um,
Hmm.
and so if you have a system, I guess, that 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 kind of handles all that as one, then it makes it that much easier. It facilitates payroll living
Absolutely.
under HR, which is what I think we're saying is preferable in a lot of cases.
Yeah, yeah. And benefits, even just the terminations and new hires, right? You've got a um, HR department that doesn't communicate those things very well, and if your payroll team is sitting under finance, they might not know that a new hire has started, or they might not know that someone was terminated. So we might continue to pay those people, or the new hires might not see a paycheck for for a little bit because payroll doesn't know that they even exist, right? And I think at, like payroll folks, we love to exchange kind of these war stories, right? And I always hear about, oh, HR didn't tell us this until the very last moment, and then we had to go back and fix stuff, or finance didn't have to tell us, or finance didn't tell us that they were doing this thing until the very last moment, and we had to go back and do all these adjustments and amendments and whatnot. And so, I think. Yes, it does make sense, at least to me and to our organization, that payroll sits with HR. But really, regardless of where your payroll team sits, it's that communication that's so critical.
Yeah, absolutely right. Wherever it sits, remaining mindful of the fact that it's so critical to the employee experience, and communication being sort of part and parcel of the employee experience. Yeah, absolutely. Really, really interesting stuff, Carney, and I'm so glad you joined us today for this episode of the podcast. And we'll have to have you back sometime to talk about some other topics.
Yeah, I'd love that. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for tuning in to the Future of Workforce Management and Payroll Insights by HR.com. We hope today's episode brought you valuable insights and fresh perspectives on the future of payroll and workforce management. Be sure to check out more episodes and explore resources at HR.com/podcast or wherever you listen to podcasts. Until next time, keep innovating and making a difference in the world of payroll and workforce management.